The funeral was a sea of black umbrellas and forced whispers, a choreographed display of grief that felt more like a stage play than a farewell. Rain drizzled from a leaden sky, slicking the marble tombstones of the cemetery, and turning the air into a cold, damp shroud. At the center of the gathering stood Chloe, the young widow, draped in designer mourning weeds that fit her perfectly, perhaps too perfectly. She leaned against the mahogany casket of her late husband, Marcus, her body trembling with a rhythmic, controlled grace. To the world, she was the picture of a broken woman, a tragic figure who had lost her soulmate to a sudden, inexplicable stroke at the age of 35. Silver stood a few paces behind, her 70-year-old frame straight and unyielding, like an old oak tree that had weathered too many storms to be bowed by this one. She didn't cry. Her eyes, a sharp and piercing silver gray that gave her her name, were fixed not on the casket, but on the back of Chloe's neck. Silver had spent 40 years as a senior researcher in toxicology and pharmaceuticals. She was a woman trained to observe reactions, to identify anomalies, and to trust data over emotion. And right now, every data point in the room felt wrong. He was so young, Silver. My heart is destroyed. Chloe sobbed later that afternoon, her voice a fragile reed as they stood in the silent living room of the Victorian house Marcus had spent his life's savings to restore. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, an heirloom Silver had given her on their wedding day. Silver watched her. She noticed the way Chloe's hand didn't tremble when she reached for her tea. Only when she noticed Silver was looking. She noticed that while Chloe's voice sounded choked with tears, her eyes remained remarkably clear, darting occasionally toward the black leather briefcase on the study table, the one containing the life insurance policy and the deed to the house. The doctors said it was a fluke, a hidden defect, Chloe continued, her gaze dropping to the floor in a practiced gesture of humility. A stroke can happen to anyone, they said. But why my Marcus? Why now? Silver remained silent for a long moment, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway filling the gaps between Chloe's feigned sobs. The heart is a complex machine, Chloe, Silver said finally, her voice low and resonant. It rarely stops without a reason. Sometimes the reason is internal. Sometimes it is introduced from the outside. Chloe's sobbing hitched for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression that would have escaped anyone else, but to Silver it was as loud as a gunshot. Chloe looked up, a mask of confused innocence sliding back into place. What do you mean, Silver? I mean that Marcus was a marathon runner, Silver replied, walking toward the window to stare out at the darkening garden. He had the cardiovascular health of a man 10 years younger. His last physical, only 3 months ago, showed no signs of hypertension, no clotting issues, no hidden defects. It is statistically improbable. Are you saying the doctors were wrong? Chloe's tone shifted, a hint of defensive steel cutting through the honeyed grief. They ran the tests. They signed the certificate. Are you suggesting they don't know their own business? Silver turned around slowly. I am suggesting that sometimes, the most dangerous things in this world are the ones that are designed to be invisible. A specific chemical compound, a concentrated dose of something that mimics a natural failure. It takes a certain kind of mind to conceive of such a thing, and a certain kind of heart to execute it. The room grew cold. The air between the two women thickened with unspoken accusations. Chloe stood up, smoothing the front of her black silk dress. The broken widow was receding, replaced by a woman who realized she was being scrutinized. I think you're just overwhelmed by grief, Silver, Chloe said, her voice regaining its composure. Loss does strange things to the mind. It makes us look for monsters where there are only tragedies. Perhaps you should rest. I have a lot to take care of, the estate, the legalities. It's a burden I have to carry alone now. You aren't alone, Chloe, Silver said, her expression unreadable. I am still here, and I have always been a very patient woman. As Chloe turned to leave the room, her gait was no longer heavy with sorrow. It was the walk of someone who had a schedule to keep. Silver watched her from the shadows of the hallway. She saw Chloe glance at her reflection in the gilded mirror by the door, adjusting her hair and checking her lipstick. There was no trace of the woman who had been collapsing over a casket just 3 hours prior. When the front door finally clicked shut, leaving Silver in the heavy silence of her son's home, she didn't head for the bedroom to rest. Instead, she walked into Marcus's private study. She sat in his chair, breathing in the fading scent of his cologne and the old books he loved. Her eyes landed on a small, framed photo on his desk. It was a picture of Marcus and Chloe on their honeymoon in Italy. Marcus was looking at Chloe with a devotion that bordered on worship. Chloe was looking at the camera, a small, triumphant smile on her lips. Silver reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small plastic vial. Inside was a tiny fragment of a pressed pill she had found at the bottom of Marcus's daily vitamin organizer the morning after he died. A pill that didn't belong, one she had spent the last week secretly analyzing in a private lab. The results had confirmed her darkest fears. A highly concentrated derivative of digitalis, enough to induce a fatal arrhythmia that would look, to any overworked ER doctor, like a textbook stroke. She looked at the photo of her son, her fingers tracing the glass over his face. "They think you were a tragedy, Marcus," she whispered into the empty room. "They think I am just an old woman who has lost her way in the fog of old age." Silver leaned back, the shadows of the room lengthening around her. In the world of high-stakes finance and ruthless ambition, people like Chloe and her investor friends thought they were the predators. They thought they could move pieces on a board and discard anyone who was no longer useful. They saw a 70-year-old mother-in-law as a relic, a guest in their grand design who could be easily managed or pushed aside. But Silver knew something they didn't. She knew that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one making the most noise. It's the one who is watching, the one who understands the chemistry of a lie, and the one who has nothing left to lose but the truth. "Good families aren't destroyed by competition or bad luck," Silver said, her voice cold and steady, echoing the philosophy she had lived by. "They are destroyed by the wrong people being allowed inside." She tucked the vial back into her pocket and stood up. The hunt had begun. Chloe thought she was moving on to a new life, a new marriage, and a new fortune. She thought the one-year anniversary of Marcus's death would be the start of her greatest triumph. But Silver was already preparing. She was gathering the data, cordoning off the variables, and waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the final, lethal dose of reality. As she walked out of the house and into the night, Silver didn't look like a grieving grandmother. She looked like a woman who had just found her purpose. The rain had stopped, and the stars were beginning to peek through the clouds, cold, distant, and sharp. Just like Silver. The transition from mourning to celebration happened with a speed that felt violent to those who truly cared for Marcus. Exactly 1 year after the funeral, to the day, the heavy black curtains in the Victorian house were replaced with sheer, champagne-colored silk. Chloe had not only moved on, she had reinvented herself. She was no longer the tragic widow. She was the vibrant co-founder of Vanguard Nexus, a tech startup that promised to revolutionize pharmaceutical logistics. And by her side, standing in the space Marcus once occupied, was Julian. Julian was everything Marcus had not been. Where Marcus was steady, quiet, and deeply principled, Julian was loud, polished, and performed every gesture as if a camera were watching. He was a serial entrepreneur, with a history of failed ventures and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. To the public, he was the supportive friend who had helped Chloe find her smile again. To Silver, he was the shark who had been circling the waters long before the first drop of blood was spilled. Silver sat in the corner of Chloe's new penthouse, a glass of untouched mineral water in her hand. The air smelled of expensive lilies and the metallic tang of new money. Chloe was radiant in a cocktail dress that cost more than a year of Silver's pension, her laughter ringing out over the sound of clinking crystal. "Silver, darling, you must try the caviar," Chloe said, gliding over with Julian in tow. She placed a possessive hand on Julian's arm. "Julian has been so wonderful. He's the one who suggested we use the inheritance to seed the company. He said Marcus would have wanted his legacy to build something world-changing." Silver looked at Julian. The man's eyes shifted for a second before settling into a practiced gaze of sympathy. "It's about honoring him, Silver," Julian added, his voice a smooth baritone. "We're turning grief into growth. That's what Marcus was about, right? Innovation." "Marcus was about integrity," Silver replied, her voice cutting through the ambient noise like a scalpel. "He believed that if the foundation was rotten, the building would eventually fall, no matter how much gold leaf you apply to the walls." Julian's smile faltered for a heartbeat. A bit grim, but I take your point. We're building a fortress here, I assure you. As the party swirled around them, Silver played the role of the frail, slightly eccentric grandmother perfectly. She wandered away from the main hall, ostensibly looking for the powder room, but her feet led her toward Chloe's private office. She knew the layout. She had memorized the blueprints of the building weeks ago. The office was a shrine to vanity. Photos of Chloe and Julian at various gala events lined the walls. Silver didn't waste time. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, weighted silk pouch. She tripped near the heavy mahogany desk, the pouch swinging and knocking over a tall, narrow vase of calla lilies. "Oh dear," Silver muttered, her voice loud enough to be heard by a passing caterer. The caterer rushed over, but Silver waved him off with a trembling hand. "No, no, child. I've got it. I'm just so clumsy these days. Please, get me some paper towels from the kitchen." The moment the young man turned his back, Silver's movements lost their frailty. She reached under the lip of the desk, her fingers finding the exact spot she had mapped out. She pressed a device no larger than a coat button against the dark wood. It was a high-gain burst transmission microphone, technology she had acquired through a former colleague in the defense industry. By the time the caterer returned, Silver was dabbing at the floor with a linen napkin, looking frustrated and old. "Thank you, dear. I think I should head home. All this excitement is a bit much for my heart." She left the party without saying goodbye to Chloe. She didn't need to. The connection was live. Back in her own small, quiet apartment, Silver sat in the dark, wearing a pair of professional-grade headphones. The audio feed was crystal clear. For 2 hours, there was only the muffled sound of the party downstairs. Then the heavy click of a door closing and the sudden drop in ambient noise. "Is the old crow gone?" Julian's voice came through, stripped of its warmth. "She's at home, probably sipping tea and crying over Marcus's old sweaters," Chloe replied. The sound of a glass being filled followed. "She's getting suspicious, Julian. She keeps talking about integrity and toxicology. She's not as senile as we'd like." "It doesn't matter," Julian snapped. "The IPO is scheduled for next month. The insurance money covered the initial burn, but we need the merger to go through. Once we're public, we can move the assets and let Vanguard Nexus bleed out. We'll be in the Caymans before the SEC even opens a file." "And the wedding?" Chloe asked. "The wedding is the perfect cover," Julian said. "A high society event to project stability. We invite the investors, we show them the happy, successful couple, and we seal the deal. After that, Silver is a non-issue. We'll put her in that assisted living facility in upstate. The one with the specialized care. She won't be able to tell a lab report from a grocery list within 6 months." Silver felt a chill, but her hand remained steady as she adjusted the recording levels. "I still can't believe how easy it was," Chloe mused, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Marcus was so careful about everything. His diet, his exercise, but he never suspected his nightly wellness tonic. He actually thanked me for making it for him. He said it helped him sleep." "Digitalis is a beautiful thing in the right hands," Julian laughed. "The perfect heart failure. Natural. Clean. Just like our exit strategy." Silver closed her eyes. The confirmation didn't bring pain. It brought a cold, crystalline clarity. She had spent a year wondering if she was seeing ghosts, if her grief had turned her into a conspiracist. Now she had the confession. But she knew a recording from a hidden bug wouldn't be enough for a conviction. In their world, the world of high-priced lawyers and innovative business structures, they would claim the audio was tampered with, or that it was a private joke taken out of context. She needed more. She needed the paper trail. She needed the connection between the chemist Julian used and the tonic Chloe prepared. She opened her laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting in her silver-gray eyes. She began to type, her fingers moving with the precision of a woman who had spent decades documenting the minute reactions of cells to poison. "You think you're running a company," Silver whispered to the empty room, her gaze fixed on a digital folder labeled Vanguard Fall. "But you're just running a crime scene. And you've invited the lead investigator to the wedding." She looked at the calendar on her desk. The wedding was in 3 weeks. 3 weeks to bridge the gap between a recorded conversation and a prison sentence. 3 weeks to ensure that when the wrong people tried to celebrate their triumph, they would instead find themselves under a microscope they couldn't escape. Silver leaned back, the headphones still around her neck. She thought about the quote Marcus's father, her late husband, had always told his son. Good companies aren't destroyed by competition. They are destroyed by the wrong people running them. The same, she realized, was true for families. She wasn't just a mother-in-law anymore. She was the auditor. And it was time to balance the books. The days leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in deception. Silver moved between her world and theirs with the ghost-like precision of a veteran operative. To Chloe and Julian, she was merely a background character, an aging woman whose presence was tolerated only for the sake of appearances. They saw her silver hair and her slightly slowed gait, and they assumed her mind had followed suit. It was their greatest mistake, the arrogance of the young believing that the old have forgotten how to fight. Silver returned to the pharmaceutical laboratory, where she had spent the better part of 4 decades. Although she was retired, the prestige of her name still held weight. She didn't enter through the front door. Instead, she reached out to an old protégé, a man named Elias who now ran a private forensic analysis firm. "I need a traceback, Elias," Silver said, laying a small, sealed bag on his steel desk. Inside was a residue she had scraped from the underside of a blender in Chloe's kitchen during a help with the dishes visit. "I need the chemical signature and, more importantly, the supplier's digital fingerprint." Elias looked at the sample, then at Silver. He saw the cold fire in her eyes and didn't ask questions. 2 days later he called her back. "It's high-purity digitoxin, Silver. But it's not medical grade. It was synthesized in an unlicensed lab in Eastern Europe. The payment was made via a cryptocurrency wallet." He hesitated. "I managed to trace the IP address used for the transaction. It didn't come from Chloe's house. It came from a guest Wi-Fi at a tech incubator downtown. Julian's office." Silver nodded, a grim satisfaction settling over her. "And the insurance money? That's the part that will bury them," Elias said, sliding a folder across the table. "Chloe didn't just take the payout. She channeled it through a series of shell companies. Nightingale Holdings, Blue Horizon Logistics *, before it landed in Julian's startup account. It wasn't just a murder, Silver. It was a structured financial takeover. They used Marcus's death as a venture capital round." Silver took the folder. The paper trail was finally complete. The digitalis was the weapon, the insurance was the motive, and the startup was the destination. But she knew that in a court of law, Julian's lawyers would argue that the cryptocurrency could have been anyone's, and the shell companies were merely complex tax planning. She needed the reveal to be so public, so undeniable, that no lawyer could spin it. She needed to destroy their reputation at the exact moment they reached their peak. She spent her nights at her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys with a speed that would have shocked Daniel and Vanessa from the Harrington Global Gala. She wasn't just organizing files. She was coding a payload. She was creating a presentation that would bypass the hotel's security protocols. A digital Trojan horse, disguised as the wedding's romantic slideshow. While she worked, she maintained the charade. She attended the final dress fitting at Chloe's request. The boutique was a cathedral of white lace and arrogance. "You look radiant, Chloe," Silver said, watching the young woman admire herself in a triple-mirrored alcove. "I feel like I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be," Chloe replied, her eyes cold as diamonds. She turned to Silver, a patronizing smile on her lips. "I know you still miss Marcus, Silver. But you have to admit, Julian has a vision that Marcus never had. Marcus was a dreamer. Julian is a builder." "Marcus built things to last," Silver said softly. "He didn't believe in cutting corners. He used to say that if a structure is built on a lie, it doesn't matter how beautiful the facade is. The gravity of the truth will eventually pull it down." Chloe laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Gravity is for people who don't know how to fly. We're going public the day after the wedding. We'll be beyond the reach of the truth by then." Silver smiled, a small, dangerous movement of her lips. "We shall see." In the final 48 hours, Silver made one last stop. She visited the local precinct and asked for Detective Miller, a man who had been a friend of Marcus's since childhood. She didn't hand over the evidence yet. She knew the bureaucracy would move too slowly. Instead, she gave him a time and a place. "I'm going to give you a gift, Miller," Silver told him. "A career-making collar. All I need is for you and your team to be at the Holbrook Grand Hotel at 8 p.m. on Saturday. Don't go to the lobby. Go to the service entrance. Wait for the signal on the main ballroom screen." Miller looked at the determined woman in front of him. He had seen Silver at the funeral, a broken mother. Now he saw a wolf. "What are you planning, Silver?" "I'm performing an audit," she said simply. "And the accounts are overdue." The night before the wedding, Silver sat alone in Marcus's study. She had packed up his things, but she left the photo of him on the desk. She looked at his smile, the genuine warmth in his eyes that Chloe had never deserved. She felt a momentary pang of sorrow, not for what she was about to do, but for the fact that she had to do it at all. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive, encased in a sleek silver casing. On it was the culmination of 3 weeks of undercover work. The audio recordings of the penthouse confession, the bank transfers from the shell companies, the forensic report on the digitalis, and the IP logs linking Julian to the chemist. It was a masterpiece of investigative work, a dossier that would have made a federal prosecutor weep with joy. But more than that, it was a mother's vengeance. She thought about the philosophy that had guided her life and her son's. She thought about the arrogance of people like Julian and Chloe, who believed that money and technology made them invincible. They thought they could treat a human life like a depreciating asset, something to be liquidated for the sake of a startup. "Good companies aren't destroyed by competition," Silver whispered to the empty room, her voice firm. "They are destroyed by the wrong people running them. And the same goes for a marriage." She stood up, her back straight, the frailty of her 70 years nowhere to be seen. She was ready. The stage was set at the Holbrook Grand Hotel. The powerful people would be there, the champagne would be flowing, and the white silk would be everywhere. Silver tucked the USB drive into her evening clutch, right next to her pearls. She wasn't just a guest at this wedding. She was the final witness. And tomorrow, she would take the stand. The Holbrook Grand Hotel was a fortress of light and excess, a shimmering monument to the kind of power that believes itself untouchable. The grand ballroom was draped in thousands of yards of white silk, illuminated by crystal chandeliers that cast a predatory glow over the 500 guests. This was the elite of the tech and venture capital world. Men and women who dealt in disruptions and exit strategies, gathered to witness the union of two of their own. Silver arrived exactly 30 minutes before the ceremony. She wore a floor-length gown of slate gray, a color that made her look like a shadow cast against the blinding white of the room. Around her neck were the pearls Marcus had given her for her 60th birthday. She walked with a cane today, leaning into the persona of the frail, grieving matriarch. Every step she took was deliberate, every nod to a passing acquaintance a calculated move. She found her seat in the front row, inches away from the massive LED screen that currently displayed a rotating logo of Vanguard Nexus. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive cologne. To her left, Julian's investors were already whispering about the IPO, their eyes gleaming with the hunger of people about to get much richer. "The timing is perfect," one man in a sharp tuxedo murmured to his colleague. "The wedding tonight, the public offering tomorrow. Julian is a genius of optics. The widow reborn narrative is pure gold for the branding." Silver's grip tightened on her cane, but her face remained a mask of polite indifference. At precisely 7 p.m., the music shifted. The heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open, and Chloe appeared. She was a vision of calculated purity, her white veil trailing behind her like a ghostly shroud. She walked down the aisle with her head held high, her eyes fixed on Julian, who stood at the altar looking like the king of a kingdom he had stolen. As Chloe passed Silver's row, she offered a small, pitying smile. It was the smile of a winner looking back at a loser. Silver merely nodded, her silver-gray eyes tracking Chloe with the cold precision of a predator watching its prey walk into the trap. The ceremony was a blur of platitudes. The officiant spoke of new beginnings and the resilience of love. Julian took Chloe's hands, reciting vows that he had likely hired a PR firm to write. He spoke of building a future together, of a partnership that would transcend the ordinary. Every word was a jagged glass shard in Silver's ears. Then came the moment. The officiant turned to the audience. If anyone here has cause why these two should not be joined in holy wedlock, let them speak now, or forever hold their peace. The room went silent. It was the standard pause, the heartbeat of tradition where no one ever speaks. Chloe and Julian shared a confident, private look. Silver stood up. The sound of her cane hitting the marble floor echoed through the silent ballroom. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Chloe's smile froze. Julian's eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation crossing his face before he smoothed it over with a look of feigned concern. Silver? Chloe whispered, her voice amplified by the microphone near the altar. Is everything all right? Are you feeling faint? Silver didn't look faint. She looked like justice rendered in stone. She stepped out into the center of the aisle, her voice clear and resonant, carrying to the very back of the hall. I don't have an objection to this marriage, Silver said, her tone unnervingly calm. Because a marriage requires a union of souls. And there are no souls standing at that altar. There is only a murderer and her accomplice. The silence in the room became absolute, a vacuum that sucked the air out of the lungs of 500 people. Silver, you're confused, Julian said, his voice dropping into a low, threatening baritone. He signaled to the security guards at the perimeter. The grief has been too much for her. Someone please help the lady to her car. I am not confused, Julian, Silver said, her eyes never leaving his. I am an auditor. And I've spent the last year looking at the books. Not just the ones for your failing startup, but the ones you thought were closed forever. She reached into her small evening clutch and pulled out the silver USB drive. With a grace that belied her age, she turned toward the technician's booth at the side of the stage. The young man behind the console looked at her, then at the detective Miller who had just appeared from the side entrance, nodding firmly. The technician plugged it in. The LED screen behind the altar flickered. The Vanguard Nexus logo vanished, replaced by a jagged audio waveform. A voice filled the room, cold, crisp, and unmistakable. Asterisk, the insurance money is almost gone, Julian. I only used enough digitalis to make it look like a stroke. I won't be so surgical with her. Asterisk. The guest stood as if struck by lightning. Chloe's face transitioned from ivory to a sickly mottled gray. She looked at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then the images began to scroll. The bank statements showing the flow of Marcus's life insurance through Nightingale Holdings. The forensic report on the digitalis residue. The time-stamped IP logs from Julian's office for the purchase of the poison. The screen became a digital guillotine, each slide falling with a sickening finality. You thought Marcus was a dreamer, Silver said, her voice rising over the panicked whispers of the crowd. You thought he was a stepping stone. But Marcus was my son. And you didn't just kill a man. You invited a scientist into your crime scene. Julian tried to move, his eyes darting toward the exits, but the service doors swung open with a heavy thud. Detective Miller and a dozen uniformed officers flooded the red carpet, their boots echoing against the marble. The powerful people in the room scrambled back, knocking over chairs and champagne flutes in their haste to distance themselves from the wreckage on the stage. The white silk of the decorations suddenly looked like bandages on a festering wound. Chloe Vance. Julian Thorne. Miller's voice boomed. You are under arrest for the murder of Marcus Silver, and for multiple counts of financial fraud and money laundering. Chloe collapsed to her knees, her white silk dress blooming around her on the floor. She looked up at Silver, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You ruined everything. We were going to be billionaires. We were going to change the world. Silver walked toward her, stopping just inches away from the woman who had poisoned her son. She leaned down, her voice a whisper that only Chloe could hear, but the microphone on the altar caught the end of it. Good companies aren't destroyed by competition, Chloe, Silver said, her eyes cold and pitiless. They are destroyed by the wrong people running them. You weren't a builder. You were just a parasite. And the host has finally fought back. As the handcuffs clicked into place, the screen behind them froze on a final image. It wasn't a bank statement or a recording. It was a photo of Marcus, smiling at a marathon finish line. His heart strong and his eyes full of life. Silver turned her back on the chaos. She didn't stay to watch them be dragged out. She didn't stay to talk to the press that was already swarming the hotel. She walked down the aisle, her cane clicking rhythmically against the floor, leaving the white silk and the powerful people behind. She had finished the audit. The debt was paid. The silence that followed the chaos of the Hallbrook Grand Hotel was not the heavy, suffocating silence of grief, but the clean, sharp quiet of a task finally completed. Silver sat in the back of a taxi, watching the city lights blur into long streaks of neon and amber. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the planning, the wiretapping, and the final confrontation was receding, leaving behind a profound, hollow exhaustion. She touched the pearls at her neck, her fingers tracing the smooth surfaces as if they were beads on a rosary. When she arrived back at the Victorian house, the house that now legally belonged to her again, stripped from the blood-stained hands of the investors, she didn't turn on the lights. She walked through the foyer in the moonlight, her cane tapping softly on the hardwood floors. The scent of Chloe's expensive lilies still lingered, a ghostly reminder of the woman who had tried to bury the past. Silver opened the windows wide, letting the crisp night air sweep through the rooms, blowing away the artificial fragrance of deception. She made her way to the kitchen and brewed a pot of tea. It was a simple, grounding ritual. As the steam rose, she sat at the small wooden table where Marcus used to eat breakfast before his morning runs. For the first time in a year, she allowed herself to truly look at the house without the fog of an investigation clouding her vision. The next morning, the world woke up to the scandal. The headlines were savage. The wedding day sting, startup sweethearts behind bars, the silent mother-in-law's revenge. The tech world was in a tailspin as Vanguard Nexus collapsed within hours. The IPO was cancelled, the assets were frozen, and the visionary founders were being held without bail, facing a mountain of evidence that even the most expensive legal team couldn't climb. Detective Miller visited her later that afternoon. He looked tired, but there was a sense of grim satisfaction in his eyes. He set a file folder down on the kitchen table. "The chemist talked, Silver," Miller said, taking the cup of tea she offered. He was a former lab tech Julian had bailed out of a gambling debt years ago. He confessed to synthesizing the digitoxin. He even had the encrypted messages from Chloe giving him Marcus's weight and medical history to ensure the dosage was perfect. Silver nodded slowly. Precision was always her vanity. She wanted to play God with a dropper bottle. "We also found the secondary insurance policy," Miller continued. "The one they tried to hide in the Cayman Shell Company. It wasn't just the $2 million from the primary, it was closer to 10. They were planning to liquidate everything and disappear after the merger." He paused, looking at her with a mix of respect and concern. "You did a hell of a job, Silver. But what happens now? The house, the money, it's all coming back to you." Silver looked out at the garden, where the first flowers of spring were beginning to poke through the soil. "I don't want the money, Miller. It's blood money. I've already instructed my lawyers to set up a foundation in Marcus's name. It will fund research into cardiac anomalies and provide scholarships for students who want to study ethics in the pharmaceutical industry. Marcus always believed that science should protect life, not exploit it. And the house. I'll stay for a while," she said. "To pack his things properly. To say goodbye without the weight of a secret. After that, I think I'll travel. Marcus always wanted me to see the coast of Italy. I think I'll go there and watch the sunset without feeling like I'm waiting for a ghost to speak." After Miller left, Silver went into Marcus's study one last time. She sat at the desk and opened the bottom drawer. Tucked away in the back was a small leather-bound notebook. It was Marcus's training log. She flipped through the pages, seeing the dates, the miles run, the heart rates recorded in his neat, engineer's script. The last entry was dated the night before he died. Feeling great. Looking forward to the big race next month. Chloe made that tea again. Tastes a bit bitter tonight, but she says it's good for recovery. Lucky to have her. Silver's hand trembled slightly as she closed the book. The cruelty of his innocence, his unwavering trust in the person who was systematically killing him, was the hardest part to bear. But as she leaned back in the chair, she felt a strange sense of peace. The lie had been dismantled. The wrong people had been removed from the seat of power. She thought about the gala at the Hallbrook, about the way Chloe and Julian had looked at her as a guest in their grand narrative, a minor character who didn't understand the real world of high finance and disruption. They had seen her age as a weakness, a slowing of the gears, never realizing that wisdom is just a more refined form of weaponry. A week later, Silver stood at Marcus's grave. The black umbrellas were gone. The rain had stopped. The sun was warm on her shoulders as she placed a single, vibrant yellow rose on the marble headstone. It was a flower for friendship, for joy, and for the life he had lived before the darkness moved in. "The audit is closed, Marcus," she whispered. "The books are balanced." She stood there for a long time, not as a victim, and not as a mourner, but as a woman who had restored the natural order of things. She had proven that the most powerful force in the world isn't a billion-dollar IPO or a sophisticated poison. It is a mother's memory. As she walked back to her car, she didn't use her cane. Her stride was steady, her head held high. She saw the news crews waiting at the gates of the cemetery, their cameras aimed like rifles. They wanted a statement. They wanted to know how it felt to destroy a tech empire with a USB drive and a lifetime of chemical knowledge. Silver didn't stop for them. She didn't need their validation or their true views. She had something far more valuable. She had the truth. She drove toward the airport, the Victorian house fading in the rearview mirror. She was leaving the shadows behind. She had spent a year as a predator in the dark, and now, she was ready to step back into the light. "Good companies aren't destroyed by competition," she murmured to the open road, a faint, witty smile touching her lips. "And good mothers aren't destroyed by tragedy. They are simply forged into something much sharper." The plane took off as the sun began to set, carrying Silver toward a horizon where there were no more secrets to uncover, no more toxins to analyze, and no more wrong people to run the world. For the first time in a very long time, she closed her eyes and simply breathed.